It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Deba Chatterjee. Deba is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Calcutta, or I'm given to understand it should be pronounced Kolkata?
No, the university is still Calcutta.
Oh, but the city is Kolkata.
Right.
Okay, but the university is still Calcutta. All right. He got his PhD in 2004. Actually, his external examiner was a professor at that time here at Madison. A man by the name of Fred Butler, unfortunately, died a few years ago. So he has a Wisconsin connection
In that sense, yeah.
in that sense. But I did note when he showed up at my door on Sunday night that this must be his first time in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And how did I know this? Because he showed up without a coat. So I've been introducing him to Wisconsin. I gave him not one but two coats back here. You've been warm enough, haven't you?
No, I don't need any more.
Okay. And then we missed the bus this morning, so we had to take the bicycle in, and he did okay with that, but he did alert me that it was the wrong side of the road for him. So I just said, just stay right behind me and you'll be okay. You're good at movement, yes, right? So he studies social movements, and he's been studying Indian social movements for some years, and so he's going to be speaking to us about that today. Particularly environmental and agrarian social movements. But another thing I learned about him, well, I actually knew this before, but I didn't really know it, is that he is a Bengali folk singer. So I learned just how good he is last night, which is excellent. We jammed until about 10:30 at night. He was teaching me all these songs with these crazy rhythms. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I'm getting excited again?
Yeah.
Okay. So he'll be performing some of these songs this evening in an agrarian song swap with Madison musicians, with me accompanying him. There's a few of the flyers here. The room has been changed to room 220 in the File Center. If you are free and want to hear some songs. And he'll sing the song, and then a couple of Madison folk musicians will sing a song as well, and we'll have a conversation about it. But right now, he is going to be presenting to us on his researches, which he's published several papers about Indian agrarian and environmental movements.
Yeah.
So join me in welcoming Deba Prashad Chatterjee.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Should I go there? I think.
Oh, no, I forgot to do one thing.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm supposed to give you a bit of Wisconsin bling.
Okay.
Yes, this is a university pen.
Okay.
So it's actually quite heavy.
Okay.
This is a good pen. Boy, I didn't know. Oh, this is a College of Agriculture pen. No wonder it's so good.
So,
It has our university colors.
Yeah, it's a good souvenir, and really. Well, I may start from my talk. I will start my talk from here.
Okay.
I was discussing with Ahmed, also with them, that we actually don't know how many pens we have individually. Can anybody answer? How many pens you have? That is a tricky question. And that leads us to the issue of carbon, sustainability. We use so many things.
Oh, you make me feel guilty. Give me that pen back.
I will not. I will not. Take it. Okay. I come here, and you see, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm thankful to Bell first, because what he told was the link. I came to know about this university, and through one of the best mind here, Fred Butler, and then I could know about Bell through his book, and he is pretty famous in India also, I can assure. I don't know about the world with this book. So I was fortunate to have some good touch with him, and that could bring me up to this. I'm thankful to the sponsors, the Development Studies Institute, the Agroecology, the South Asian Studies Institute, to invite me for a talk here. and that is a rare opportunity also. I can tell you, I'm not that a frequent traveler, and you see, I don't get so much opportunities always to tell, to share something which I keep in my mind. Well, I can tell about my own history also a little bit, is that you are passing now days of movement here. I came to know that, say, the protest movements, the social movements, which I was so much engaged in during my student days. So I had good team, which we call band nowadays, of music, and we participated in rallies and movements and also slogans. And I come from West Bengal, Kolkata, a place where people, just fear to go because of traffic disruptions, because of social movements, because of rallies of political parties. People fear, so also the industrialists fear the state. We are, in that sense, a state in India where people may be not that, well off, but they waste so much of time. They converse more. And point to share with you, the West Bengal is the first state in India which got the light of modernity through the British rays. You can say British rule has both some kind of constructive and some kind of destructive roles for India. Well, before moving any step forward, I first beg your some kind of patience and your maybe your extra capacity to understand some kind of English which I may be able to speak, because I don't have that accent which may be much more understandable, which would be much more understandable to you. I know that you also don't have that type of accent which can take you closer to me. The last night I was fighting with Mike about, with some words which are Bengali. So it is normal, and as you know, because this is university, and you have that enough diversity in you, how a person from South Asia, maybe from India, maybe from Pakistan, may pronounce English. So I'm not different from that, and that may pose some difficulties for you, but I believe that if our intentions remain there to understand each other, that conversation would be possible. Well, I will try, and you may have to try also a bit. Okay, I go to the next slide where I just left 1 minute before, that this, in contemporary India, the developmental processes, I first tell about the 200 years of British rule, and then it has got both kind of impacts on India. British were the rulers, so they exploited the country. That was kind of destructive role. But Karl Marx also pointed to some kind of regenerative role, which we also find after 200 years, when from the last 1990s onward, we had globalization. I will go to that point. But you see, we started to go global, or we got some kind of global influence, not just 15 years back or 10 years back from now. Well, it was 200 years back or more than that, 250 years more than that now, we had some global influence from the British. And that tells about the regenerative story. We have perhaps one of the largest railway networks, public transport in India. Most of that built by the British. And we have the bridges, we have the roads, either made or developed by the British. So it's not that British people only exploited India. To facilitate that exploitation, they also had to make us understand their language. So they introduced English, and that could take the Kolkata or the Bengal global first time. We had a host of scholars who went global and got their stories, what is going on in other parts of the world. Minus the British, it was not possible for us. So that tells about some positive roles also of a colonial ruler like British, who came there, who went there mainly to exploit us. Now, in post-independent India, the government adopted a welfare state model through Soviet Russia type of, and you know about those days of Cold War. You see two great worlds, first world and second world. Either you would be a follower of these or that. So India, after independence, started to develop itself, its economy, through plans, which we learned from Soviet model, and 5-year plans. Now, a novel dimension in the process of development was added since the 90s. So I jumped pretty fast because it's not a lecture on the history of this development. So let me allow to go to these 1990s when, you see, the IMF-led structural adjustment policy and liberalization and privatization of the economy started to take place. And we can take roughly the process of globalization, which is now going on, started since then. Now, what is the impact? As I just mentioned about the impact of British rule, both destructive and regenerative, globalization also has a kind of dual role. Now, some advantages are there, some benefits you can say, that it has opened up new possibilities of economic and social development for India. And the tremendous growth of Indian multinational companies. Well, we had multinational companies of outside doing business in India prior to that. But nowadays, we have Indian multinational companies doing business here, buying companies here in USA, big tracts of land in Texas, and maybe some kind of copper mines, coal mines, maybe in Minnesota, are owned by Indian businessmen. Now that is something which is new, which was not there before 90s. And obviously the reverse process, well, the British went there, they did the business, and that money could prosper UK. If I can do business outside of India, bring money back to India, that will also prosper. There may be a promise from this side, which is like a benefit of this growth of Indian MNCs. And also, you know about the famous Indian IT story, information technology. I will share with you some interesting things. One of those are, there is a 15 minutes lecture by Shashi Tharoor. I will not allow Shashi Tharoor to take 15 minutes from my time here, but I will allow 5 minutes for him to tell about the benefits. I will go to that website and to see if we can, well, if I click it, can I go straight there?
Oh, I have to.
Yeah? Just help.
Yeah, I have to log in to the wireless quick.
Well, while he makes the technical thing, I just share what Shashi Tharoor had that in total lecture. Probably some of you, and maybe many of you of South Asian studies know about TED, and they organize series of lectures. And this TED has some series of lectures on India. And can you, I don't know anybody here is familiar with the name Shashi Tharoor? No. Shashi Tharoor was a staff member of Indian Foreign Service, you see, worked in United Nations for a considerable period of time, and then fought the election to become its Secretary General last, where Ban Ki-moon won and Shashi Tharoor was defeated. He then went back to India and became a kind of member of parliament and a minister. And so what he will tell probably will paint a bit of rosy picture about India and its glossy things. We have something else also which we should not expect from Shashi Tharoor, which can only done by us because of our bad habit of digging good things and finding something bad from that. Globalization also has some negative things. Well, that would come next, and there also I will share with you, and that will be my last part. I will share with you a music sung by the protesters there, and what that mean, what they tell, what is going on. It's not that globalization is benefiting India in every front. We have the problems with human rights. Often the state is the violator. Often you may are familiar with the kind of internal colonialism. We have a kind of, say, British legacy. So the rulers in India often act like the British, you see, they divide the movement and rule the people. They use every kind of divisions which may be there between people, maybe in the name of religion or language or ethnicity, to their end. I mean, it helps them to assure their rule, their control. So, well, that is a kind of British teaching. British divided India and Pakistan, and well, they wanted to pose one community, that is Hindus, against the other, the Muslims, while the reality is that in the ground level, Hindus and Muslims, common people, are very good friends. But if you are a political leader and your intention is to create differences because that may help your rule to conform, to get confirmed, then you may be able to put India as an enemy of Pakistan, and that fetch better votes for you, for your maybe chair of prime minister or maybe of your president, at the cost of the interest of the people, at the cost of the development of a particular society. You see, so, well, that is a bad part of British legacy, which, the rulers will never tell. So we should not expect that Shashi Tharoor is going to tell about all these things. He should not, and he will not. Yes, so we have arrived, and it starts now. I told you at the beginning that I would not allow Tharoor to tell more than 5 minutes because he is taking time from me. But he is a good orator, better than me. He can sum up the things what I would like to tell.
You always talk about India becoming a world leader, even the next superpower. In fact, the American publishers of my book, The Elephant, the Tiger, and the Cell Phone, added a gratuitous subtitle saying, India, the next 21st century power. And I just don't think that's what India is all about, or should be.
You want to turn it up?
Indeed, what worries me is the entire notion of world leadership seems to me terribly archaic. It's redolent of James Bond movies and Kipling ballads. After what constitutes a world leader? If it's population, we are on course to top the charts. We will overtake China by 2034. Is it military strength? Well, we have the world's 4th largest army. Is it nuclear capacity? We know we have that. The Americans have even recognized it in an agreement. Is it the economy? Well, we have now the 5th largest economy in the world in purchasing power parity terms, and we continue to grow. And the rest of the world took a beating last year. We grew at 6.7%. But somehow, none of that adds up to me to what I think India really can aim to contribute to the world in this part of the 21st century. And so I wonder, could what the future beckons for India be all about be a combination of these things allied to something else? The power of example, the attraction of India's culture. What, in other words, people like to call soft power. Soft power is a concept invented by a Harvard academic, Joseph Nye, a friend of mine, and very simply, and I'm really cutting it short because of the time limits here, it's essentially the ability of a country to attract others because of its culture, its political values, its foreign policies. And lots of countries do this. He was writing initially about the States, but we know the Alliance Française is all about French soft power, the British Council. The Beijing Olympics were an exercise in Chinese soft power. The Americans have the Voice of America and the Fulbright scholarships. But the fact is, in fact, that probably Hollywood and MTV and McDonald's have done more for American soft power around the world than any specifically government activity. So soft power is something that really emerges partly because of governments, but partly despite governments. And in the information era we all live in today, what we might call the TED age, I'd say that countries are increasingly being judged by a global public that's been fed on an incessant diet of internet news, of televised images, of cell phone videos, of email gossip. In other words, all sorts of communication devices are telling us the stories of countries, whether or not the countries concerned want people to hear those stories. Now, in this age again, countries with access to multiple channels of communication and information have a particular advantage, and of course they have more influence sometimes about how they're seen. India has more all-news TV channels than any country in the world, in fact, than most of the countries in this part of the world put together. But the fact still is that it's not just that. Someone have to soft power, you have to be connected. And one might argue that India has become an astonishingly connected country. I think you've already heard the figures. We've been selling 15 million cell phones a month. Currently there are 509 million cell phones in Indian hands in India, and that makes us larger than the US as a telephone market. In fact, those 15 million cell phones are the most connections that any country, including the US and China, have ever established in the history of telecommunications. But what perhaps some of you don't realize is how far we've come to get there. You know, when I grew up in India, telephones were a rarity. In fact, they were so rare that elected members of parliament had the right to allocate 15 telephone lines as a favor to those they deemed worthy. If you were lucky enough to be a wealthy businessman or an influential journalist or a doctor, something might have a telephone. But sometimes it just sat there. I mean, I went to high school in Calcutta, and we would look at this instrument sitting in the front foyer, but half the time we'd pick it up with an expectant look on our faces. There'd be no dial tone. If there was a dial tone, you dialed a number, the odds were 2 and 3 you wouldn't get the number you were intending to reach. In fact, the words wrong number were more popular than the word hello. If you then wanted to connect to another city, let's say from Calcutta you wanted to call Delhi, you'd have to book something called a trunk call and then sit by the phone all day waiting for it to come through. Or you could pay 8 times the going rate for something called a lightning call. But lightning struck rather slowly in our country in those days, so it's like about half an hour for a lightning call to come through. In fact, so woeful was our telephone service that a member of parliament stood up in 1984 and complained about this. And the then communications minister replied in a lordly manner that in a developing country, communications are a luxury, not a right, that the government had no obligation to provide better service, and if the honourable member wasn't satisfied with his telephone, could he please return it, since there was an 8-year-long waiting list for telephones in India. Now fast forward to today, and this is what you see, the 15 million cell phones a month. But what's most striking is who's carrying those cell phones. You know, if you visit friends in the suburbs of Delhi on the side streets, you will find a fellow with a cart that looks like it was designed in the 16th century, wielding a coal-fired steam iron that might have been invented in the 18th century. It's called an istriwala. But he's carrying a 21st century instrument. He's carrying a cell phone, because most incoming calls are free, and that's how he gets orders from the neighborhood to get to know where to collect clothes to get them on. The other day I was in Kerala, my home state, at the country farm of a friend about 20 kilometers away from any place you'd consider urban. And it was a hot day, and he said, hey, would you like some fresh coconut water? And the best thing, the most nutritious and refreshing thing you can drink on a hot day in the tropics. So I said, sure. And he whipped out a cell phone dial number, and a voice said, I'm up here. And right on top of the nearest coconut tree, with a hatchet in one hand and a cell phone in the other, was the local toddy tapper, who proceeded to bring down the coconuts for us to drink. Fishermen are going out to sea and carrying their cell phones. When they catch the fish, they call all the market towns along the coast to find out where they get the best possible prices. Farmers now, who used to have to spend half a day of back-breaking labor to find out if the market town was open, if the market was on, whether the product they harvested could be sold, what price they'd fetch. They'd often send an 8-year-old boy all the way on the trudge to the market town to get that information and come back, then load the cart. Today they're saving half a day's labor with a 2-minute phone.
So we stop here because he is allowed only 5 minutes, but he could present one side. That story of a mobile phone primarily, but he had so many things other to tell, and you can go to that and you can enjoy the entire talk of 20 or 7 minutes, something like that. You also have a video, transcript of his entire lecture there, so you can also read that. And I hope I should not tell anything more on, you see, that was only one side, but you see, that indicates kind of connectivity or kind of possibilities that may be there from this globalization. I often think that globalization has less thing to give for the United States in terms of benefits, to UK, to Germany, and to other developed countries, because globalization is not new to these countries. Untold, they were going global for last 200 years, since the days of Industrial Revolution. So if anything better is to reap, if anything benefits is to reap, well, that may be done by the emerging economies, like maybe China, which is already doing here in America, followed by India, and maybe other developing countries who may have some kind of benefits. If you compare who is getting more benefits for this process of globalization, for this WTO or IMF-led globalization process. So when in early 90s, globalization was going to start, the process of liberalization and privatization, well, there were people protest. And we also protested, we also wrote songs that we stand against globalization and that is structural adjustment of economy. This will ruin what happened with the countries of Latin America. And in that at that time, or soon after that, with the Asian tigers, maybe you know the countries like Taiwan and you see Singapore and Indonesia and other countries who were well far advanced at those stages. But what we have in India is a big internal market. So economically, the fruits of globalization may be better there. I told economically. Now we go back to this. We shifted from here. Go to the next. What are the disadvantages? Now, infrastructural bottlenecks are there. Well, that is not anything to do with the globalization. Well, only globalization and more money flow can ease this. We may have better infrastructure only in future. But bottlenecks are there. So also is the problem of distributive justice. It's a totally different thing. I mean, the fruits of globalization, whether that fruits are trickling down or that is enhancing the already existing distance between the rich and the poor, inequalities, well, we have to look into that. That is not, I mean, reducing in that sense. Well, people under poverty line, the proportion of people under the poverty line is going low. But you should also know about, and most of you already know, that how poverty line is defined in an Indian context. It is absolute poverty. If you can only have that amount of money which help you to buy a square meal a day, then you are not considered a poor. Well, rest assured, you may not need any kind of clothing or shelter, or may not be even the energy to cook the food. That those are not taken into account. Only you have the money to buy the grains for a 5-member, 4-member family, maybe 1 kilogram. Well, we use the term not see pounds in there or others. We tell grams and kilograms. It's a CGS system. We talk in terms of Celsius, not in terms of Fahrenheit. We work down on the left of the road. It's a British influence. Well,
see, we're more colonial than India.
okay, yeah. So, yeah. But India could get things only from British, where you could get so many other influences here in US. So, well, the thing is that, so if you can buy 500 grams of rice in India, which may be about, say, 10 rupees, that is 1 quarter here, you see, 25 cents for your family. So you are not considered as a poor. Now think of that and multiply that by, say, 30 and to arrive at a kind of monthly salary, which may take you up over the poverty line. In that case also, I can say more than 20% of people in India are below the poverty line. It's going down. The percentage went down from 30 in last 10 years to 20. It's significant for a country like India, which have perhaps the second, already the second largest population, and perhaps is going to win the battle with China to have the largest population on this globe. maybe after 20 years from now. The second and the third problem is, well, I would say the second problem is that is the feeling of relative deprivation. Well, the absolute deprivation is okay. But when you face relative deprivation, well, as we know as students of sociology, well, courtesy guard, that is more dangerous. If you find some similarities with your companion, that he is also not getting the good thing, you just adjust your own self according to that. You don't feel deprived in that sense. But if you get nothing while in front of you some conspicuous consumption is going on in the cities, in the towns, that creates a hotbed for, you see, social movement. So that is there in India, and these underprivileged people are taking the route of protest and movements. So that also takes us to the different arena of, you see, impact of globalization, that major national developmental processes initiated by the state in recent years, often in consonance with the forces of globalization, that affects the agrarian and the indigenous people. Well, that include some big dams. It's not that after globalization these were started. It started since the process of independence. We talk about globalization after 90 because we want to treat it differently. But this process is not, to be viewed in that way that it only started and it doesn't have any history. So it was there, and we had multi-purpose river valley projects by the government of India. Establishment of special economic zones is new. It is only happening after 90s to foster industrial development, and this industrial development, well, in India we have two different types of industries. Some industries are owned by the state. It's a government-owned industry as well as private industries. But these special economic zones are primarily meant for the private sector. It's not the government industry like Coal India Limited, owned by the government. They are permitted to form a special economic zone. There are construction of mines and construction of roads and building new townships, which are consequent to globalization. And these are the processes which are actually excluding the indigenous, the agrarian, you can tell, the marginal population outside the process of globalization, and are the factors which may push to kind of civil war situation in India, despite of all those advantages and promises of betterment in future. Now, all these lead to displacement of indigenous and agrarian people from their traditional habitats, and all these are being carried out without any uniform rehabilitation policy and program for the disadvantaged. In a number of ways, the state itself is violating the basic human rights at many instances and many occasions. And that is what I want to mean by a kind of internal colonialism of the state. You have so many theories of that, and you know the people feel that. See, often I talk about myself, whether I'm an Indian or I am a Bengali, what is my identity? If I find that there is a government of India who is not catering to my needs, then there is no difference between myself and the people in Kashmir. See, well, British people branded our freedom fighters as extremists, terrorists. See, but nowadays we worship them. We observe holidays at their birthdays, date of births. We worship them as freedom fighters. So it's the context. So the people in Kashmir are protesting against the Indian state. The people in Manipur, they are also protesting against the Indian state. The people in the central India are protesting against the Indian state. Can you imagine that people in any state of America is protesting against America? Well, that means a kind of situation of civil war. If your protest is with arms and with soldiers, and that is going to happen. So the future may not be that smooth for, the development of India if we do not take into account these kind of issues, which the famous author, and she had many prizes with her, Arundhati Roy, you know the name, the writer of The God of Small Things, is also mentioning nowadays that, you see, we cannot avoid civil war if we pursue and if we do not change our policy with this distribution side of the fruits of globalization. So that is a big problem which we had to resolve. I go to the next. So the deprivation of the indigenous people's rights, if you want to go a bit more into that, the disadvantaged agrarian Adivashis, we call indigenous people or tribal people, that is an Indian name, we call them as Adivashis. This is one Indian term. Well, Adi means the past, and Vashi means the resident. So it's the same. Well, original inhabitants, indigenous people, we call them as Adivashis, are facing a sustained and chronic economic deprivation that has only intensified with the onset of globalization. So that is evident now. You see, the movements in the central part of India, about which you already know. You see, in the states of Andhra Pradesh, in Jharkhand, maybe in Chhattisgarh, these are the states on the central Indian tribal belt where people are taking up arms and fighting against the Indian military. Often state takes a kind of coercive role, repressive role, and that foments further violence and further struggle. So that is an area of concern for the future. In fact, the story of the agrarian and tribal deprivation in India dates back to the 19th century. So this is not new again. When British government dispossessed the tribal or indigenous from the right to the forest. Now, there are some kind of old agrarian movements. Agrarian movements led by the Communist Party of India. Those are famous agrarian movements, you know the names. Tebhaga movement in 1946-49 in Bengal. The demand of 3/4 share of the produce. See, the person who is stealing the land should get more than half, that is 3/4, and the landlord should get 1/4 share. That was a kind of demand for this Tebhaga movement. The term Tebhaga stands for Te stands for 3, and Bhaga stands for share. So we want 3/4 share of the third share, that is 3/4 of the total. That is the etymology of the term Tebhaga, 3 part. We need 3/4, you will get 1 because you are the landlord. That is Tebhaga. The other is Telangana, the name of a place. Telangana is a region which is having some places of Andhra Pradesh, you know the name of the state, and Karnataka, and also what is today called as Chhattisgarh, maybe from Madhya Pradesh, MP. Now that is in Andhra Pradesh primarily the protest against the feudal lords. It was just a protest and led by the Communist Party of India, but again it started before independence, and the famous Naxalbari movement. Now this is there's a confusion with the term Naxal or Naxalite. You know, the name of the place is Naxalbari. It is in West Bengal. In the northern part of the state, there is a village called Naxalbari. And for the first time from that village, you see, the armed uprising against the state machinery started. And they were branded as people from Naxalbari, known as Naxalites. And what is going on today in the entire central part of India, well, it's a large tract of land, more than 400,000 square miles. It's a big tract of land. India is a big country compared to some other countries in the world. And it's a big area where, you see, these people are coordinating the fighting for their rights and taking up arms. They are called as Naxalites, again, by the state. As the British called our freedom fighters, who are freedom fighters today, they were terrorists at that time. So the Naxalites are today's terrorists in India. But they are Indians. They are actually demanding their rights, their human rights, their food. They want to have food for, at least 2 square meals per day. Now, you see, if you be very nationalist in that sense, go with the leading national and established mainstream political circles, you term them as Naxalites, and some people who are unwanted who are disturbing the process of development. Well, if you go on with the kind of development which excludes them, then you see they are also the people of India, and you see they constitute a good majority of disadvantaged section of the Indian population. So you can no longer keep them deprived. And that is the reason Arundhati Roy also, supporting their cause. This is a difference. You see, previously the Naxalite menace or trouble was avoided by the middle class intellectuals. But the new thing about these protest movements is that whatever the state calls about these movements, Naxalite or something unwanted for, the middle class, the intellectuals are not pursued by that. They are supporting their cause. And that adds a new trouble for the government. Often a lot of dilemma of how to control these. It cannot go with the tanks and other airjet fighters to bomb the places and to kill its own people, as it could do during those old movements. Old agrarian movements could be tackled by blatant force, sheer force of the state. But the state is now in a dilemma because these people and their cause, the people who are protesting today against the forces of globalization, because they are deprived of the process, are also supported by those who are haves. This is a movement from the sphere of civil society, which was not there during the old agrarian movements. So in recent years, we have agrarian movements taking two distinct forms. If we try to organize the things here, the first is spearheaded by the mainstream political parties, including the communist parties. Now these communist parties in India, most of them are mainstream political parties. So these communist parties are not those parties like the days of Che Guevara here, or they are not banned in that sense. They are parliamentary, they are believers in parliamentary democracy, and they work with the other nationalist parties in tandem and in close contact. So communist parties also are there, known to be the left, that were known to be the leftist organizations in a parliamentary democratic political setup, and they generally adopt the non-violent, relatively peaceful route. Well, we have rich traditions of non-violence. So many research papers are there on Gandhian philosophy of non-violence in every South Asian studies department. So you know about that great policy of non-violence that is there, practiced by established political parties. And they take up the issues primarily in consonance with government programs as land reforms, because those are government parties, mainstream political parties. So they just carry out the government programs of land reforms, better wages, rural and agricultural development to primarily facilitate the electoral prospect of the respective political organization. So it is more than whether you are coming out of the poverty line. It is my political party which is getting the benefit. Often, they face defeat in that case, in their objectives. These movements are grossly institutionalized. So the movements which are led by established political parties are rarely to be called as a social movement by a student of sociology. When you just swallow a movement as a member of the state, you buy the movement, it no longer remains a movement. If everything becomes so much institutionalized, rarely you can call that a social movement. It loses all the cardinal features of collective mobilization and social movement. We do not call them as social movements in that sense. Those are government programs. We can tell that. Now also there flows a separate stream of agrarian protest movements that mainly involve the disadvantaged indigenous people. Rarely we'll find the real sufferers in those movements. And here you find this stream is again composed of two different substreams, both falling outside the mainstream political process. So I make a categorization like that. See, there was a mainstream political process, having land reform, better wage and other, rarely to be called a social movement, that stream. And the other is where the indigenous people are involved, the real sufferers are involved. Now the first is spearheaded by NGOs, non-government organizations and civil rights groups as National Alliance for People's Movements. I was a member with this group, a National Alliance for People's Movements. and Association for Protection of Democratic Rights, we call APDR in India, and other, you see, even Amnesty International and other organizations which you know often join to this kind of, you see, initiatives that actually benefit the sufferers, people who are facing deprivation. Now they generally take the non-violent, again, relatively peaceful, and takes up primarily issues like displacement. So their issues are different from the earlier ones. It's not land reforms, better wage, but you see, when you go to make a big industrial project, you just snatch the land from the poor people by your coercive state machinery. People in this movement, they protest against such kind of displacement. They look after the process of rehabilitation, whether state is giving it, and the justice and human rights issues. Well, those are human rights organizations primarily, so they work in that line, and really these movements are helpful. Save Narmada movement, as you know, led by Medha Patkar, often known as an environmental movement, but I have some other things to share with you, whether I can think these protest movements by the purely disadvantaged groups who want to have food to be called as a kind of environmental movement. While Ramachandra Guha, again, a good friend, a common friend,
Yes.
he has his own variety of Indian environmentalism as different from Western. Well, because to brand something as environmental may add to maybe the trend of ongoing scholarship. If something environmental is happening in USA or in UK, we are not that unfortunate people in India that we are not having something environmental. Well, if that is the case, this is one. The second is, I can have some mileage also. If I am a university professor, want to have a good Ford Foundation or NSF grant, I term the movement of disadvantaged people, I put a label and I brand them, I sell them. So the Chipko movement, which happened in early 1970s, were branded as an environmental movement after 80s, when Vandana Shiva could rediscover that was the environmental movement. When you were observing Earth Days there, we were not silent. We also had our Chipko movement. Well, you can term, because those have environmental messages in that. If the disadvantaged tribal hill people hug the trees, not allowing the MNCs to cut down those trees, well, this is environmental, no doubt. But then you have to tell what I share with so many friends now, that the movements which are carried out in the central region of India today, branded by state as extremists, as Naxalites, but no scholars are there to term these movements are also environmental movements. But why? Because their slogans include the demand for land, the demand for water, the demand for forest, the demand for trees. How you can, avoid these movements and as environmental movements? But you will find rarely scholars, even our friend is not taking up this and not supporting this as a kind of environmental movement. I would say that these are actually not environmental movements. These are the movements of the downtrodden people. Trying to make those environmental and then, you see, go on based on that kind of presumption may not be, tenable at the end of the day. So this Save Narmada movement, whether your book tells that it is a kind of environmental movement, may not be for me. Yeah, anything?
Yeah, maybe 5 10
Okay,
minutes.
the time is
Yeah.
time is running. Okay, I'm just probably at the end now.
Okay.
I don't have so much of slides. I do not want to bore you. On the other hand, the revolutionary Maoists are there. Well, I come to these people now. Well, they are the extremists, Naxalites, and state has all the guns against them. But they are poor people of India. They are disadvantaged. You sing your folk for them, and then you do not support them. Well, that may be a kind of double standard for anybody. So the intellectuals and the middle class and the scholars from universities and colleges are also supporting these people against the state. It's a peculiar situation. State cannot have, you see, free land now to kill these disadvantaged people and their rights. So they cannot. On the other hand, the revolutionary Maoists, often notorious as the Naxalites, believe in forcible seizure of the state power. So they have that dream. Well, whether the disadvantaged people are aligned to them, that is another question. Well, this disadvantaged group of peoples are having their own civil society sphere organizations that often collaborates with these Maoists, often not. And you see, they follow the guerrilla warfare strategy. Their focus primarily hovers around the economic disadvantage and distress of the indigenous people. I have one more link here. Well, I skip this because of time, because I will not skip the music that is to end. Now, the primarily coercive, post-colonial state is primarily coercive and repressive. Well, this is one. The other is often that pursues a kind of divide and rule policy, which we learned from the British. It's a colonial legacy. Salwa Jurum, well, you probably some of you who do research on this have already got the name. Salwa Jurum is the Indian term. It's a kind of divide and rule. State also encouraged some groups of tribal people to fight from inside against this kind of movement. So it's again, it's dividing the tribal, the disadvantaged people into two, so that the entire story can be controlled in a better way. Well, this failed, and ultimately, I tell, but has lately proved to be a failure and is called off. The state is no longer doing Salwa Juru. Now, in West Bengal, where I stay, from where I come here, we have some we say support from the middle class intellectuals for Nandigram and Shingur movements. Probably some of you already know about the term Nandigram movement, which happened just 1 year back. And Shingur movement was a kind of movement where the Tata Motors, who have now bought the brands Jaguar and Land Rover from Ford. You see, it's a big multinational, Indian multinational, wanted to make a car factory there. And the people protested and drove him out from the land. He went to Gujarat to make his factory there at Sanand later on. So you see, it's about the success also because of the involvement of the entire society. A clear line of separation, although mutually supportive to each other, between the Maoist group. So I mentioned about that. It's not that these Maoists are the tribals and the tribals are the Maoists. It's a clear, it's a simplistic kind of argument to analyze this Maoist movement in India. They have People's Committee in Lalgarh movement. Probably some of you already know about the name, which is very vibrant right now. Maybe yesterday police went there. They are fighting against the People's Committee. And from the standpoint of state, both the People's Committee and the Maoists are treated as same because both are against the state. So they are same group, but while really they are not. These two groups often work in collaboration. Often, again, you see, they will not support each other, but they will support the movement. Now, tacit support of the mainstream opposition parties, that is, again, a support from the mainstream opposition, that is creating some kind of strength for these disadvantaged people. And we have in West Bengal Trinamool Congress, and as you are going to movement right 1 hour after from now here, you see, we are going to a kind of election this month also. And you see, in West Bengal, we have 35 years of rule by a so-called, quote-unquote, communist party. Will be defeated. I mean, that is my understanding of the West Bengal politics, that this Trinamool Congress will come into power. How they can be? Because they are supported by, and they supported, so they got the support from these people, and also the middle class, who determine often, so you are in the movement. I finish here and just go to that link. It's about a song. It's a protest song. You may not get the language, but you will get a tribal song music. And that tells about, you see, well, the name of the song is, well, in Indian Hindi, it's Gaon chorab nahi. That means we will not leave our village. Jungle chorab nahi. That means we will not leave our forest. Ma, mati, manush, larai chorab nahi. Mother, our earth, and our forest, our land, our water, we will not leave this place and allow you to industrialize. And it's a beautiful song indeed. And you can put up the lamps, yeah. The lamps at the auditorium. You have subtitles. I got the subtitle, and it tells the story. What I was trying to tell, that it's about internal colonialism. They feel that. I mean, it's a kind of song which is their feeling. They tell about nature, they tell about environment, but we the scholars are yet to, because we are not getting any kind of cue from other countries, the developed countries, whether we should treat those as environmental movements. But if the demands and the issues are such that these are environmental and agrarian at the same time, neither the agrarian movements, the scholars, are taking up these as the agrarian movements in India in that scale. Except one or two, I can just have one book for that which also deals that as agrarian movements, because the agricultural people and the agrarian society is involved in that. So that's about the entire thing, and it's now your questions and comments and discussions. Yeah? It's open. Because I was a bit simplistic as well as provocative. Yeah.
So you said that you thought globalization was maybe better for India than it is for the US, but then it seemed you also said that globalization was not very good for India. So you were saying it's economically good and socially bad? Or?
Yes, I go with that.
Yes.
Economically good because it has a lot of promises.
Mm-hmm.
It's undeniable that we are going to benefit from and we are already, when you have a recession here, India had more than 6.5% growth. And in this year we had more than 8% growth of GDP, and it will touch 10%. And it will beat China, very late, maybe within the next couple of years you will find that it's going to happen because of two things. One is that we have a very strong internal market, and the other is Indian multinationals are turning the loss-making global companies into profit. So Chorus, which is a UK steel major, was suffering huge loss. Tata Steel bought that, and from this year Chorus is making huge profits. So also for the Novelis of USA, and all those stories of fracking, shale gas in Texas and other states in the south of this country, many of those are now owned by Mukesh Ambani. That he's one of the richest person in world now, and he is investing in this kind of lands which happen to be farmlands in USA or maybe barren lands, but now he will invest money. So this money will flow back to India. And well, if you want to, if you go by the trickle-down theory, that would be, that may not be, history may not repeat in that way. So it's good that the poor people may have some more access. What Shashi Tharoor told, that the man on the coconut tree or the istiriwala is getting new business because he is having the mobile phone. And I also tell...
But he's still up the tree.
Yeah, he is still up the tree. It's not different. Someone would be on the tree. Well, in India, we are not just following the same model of mechanical or mechanization, which is very common here in USA or UK. Maybe he will be on the tree, but he should have decent life at least. If he get more money, he will be able to come out of the poverty. And then you see, machines may come and ruin, as it is ruining here. Not always benefiting. So that is another side. Okay, so it's economically good. But then if you don't have that definite policy of distribution of the fruits, then you have to tackle this kind of troubles. And I think people will take care of their plight.
So we have this expression in English, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
But that's not true when some of the boats remain anchored.
Yes. I think it's a good analogy. I would go for that. Yeah. If I could tell that, it's better. Yeah. So,
So is this the song was really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Do you feel like it's a song that's gaining voices like around the country?
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's getting the support of middle class. That is most important. I mean, we are not considering them as they. It's not we and they. Well, that was very famous before 6 months, maybe 1 year back from now. In Kolkata, in Calcutta, you will find it's always a division between Amra and Ora. Amra means we, Ora, these are Bengali terms, Ora means they. So, who are the supportive of the party in power are Amra, we. And whoever you might be, if you protest against that, you are they, in that sense. Now, you see, I told that, you see, people are supporting these causes. The movements which I mentioned here in Nandigram, and then that was a success of the downtrodden people. I can list a story, I mean, there is a list of success also, which is not the case with Naxalite movement of 1960s. Well, so Nandigram was a successful movement by the downtrodden, disadvantaged people. And then Singur could drive out someone who could buy Land Rover and Jaguar model branded here. But in his own country, he is driven out from a location. That is important. That was the story of Singur. All these are there in websites. You can have Nandigram, Singur, keywords, and get so many information, so much information about that. And then Lalgar movement, which I also mentioned here. All these are either in West Bengal or related to West Bengal. And some other movements outside of West Bengal, in Orissa, you see POSCO from, you see, South Korea, is steel farm, big industrial house, going to have some land. Also, you know about Vedanta Resources from UK. He is Anil Agarwal from India, is now UK. He is a UK resident now, and is a UK businessman, going to invest in his own country, and he couldn't do. Starlight Industries were protested, and you see, tribal protests, people's protest, drove him again out of the. That is again a success story. And if you get middle class support from the people like Medha Patkar, like Arundhati Roy, and again Rama Guha is not against that. He is so nice a person, but he goes for primarily Gandhian and non-violent techniques. Maybe violent, maybe non-violent. If the people gets the benefits and they win, then that may bring the better future for India. So there are rays of hope, but not strong beam of light. There are some success stories also.
What about media perceptions of these movements?
Well, I was amazed to learn from him about the role of media here. If Wisconsin is in a movement, the entire nation doesn't know that. Well, I was not aware of any kind of movement of this scale was going on in Wisconsin. Well, I have my teacher there. Well, he's again a friend.
I was pointing out to Deba, I don't know if you noticed there was a lot of talk in the media last week about a protest by the Tea Party in Washington, D.C. on Thursday, I believe it was. Michelle Bachmann was speaking there. There were 200 people at that rally.
But that got more publicity.
Right.
Yeah, so that happens to be. Media is a bit biased here. So it's not entirely biasless in India because media has to depend on government advertisements. We have films in our Bengali films on that also, that why media cannot always stand against the government. But we also have the stories of free media. So yes, media is supporting in many times the deprived people's cause. So that is also there. It's not that biased or partisan as it is here, at least I can tell you.
Yeah. You mentioned that after 1947, India adopted the Soviet welfare
and plan, 5-year plan model.
Plan and system. And then in mid-1990s, I think they opened.
Early 1990s, 91.
Okay. But the problem we see that the agrarian movements that you mentioned, they were in 60s and they had the same problem.
The old ones,
Now,
yeah.
The old ones.
Yeah.
And the new ones also after the globalization.
Yeah.
So where is the real problem? Why this movement, it was neither good at that time nor now. So where the problem lies? Where is the...
Well, a problem, I couldn't get the question because it was not good at that time.
And it's neither good now.
What for? I
The
mean,
system changed.
Okay.
But still the...
well, I find this set of movements bearing better hopes because the Naxalite movement of late 1960s, a bit kind of dissociation from the mainstream, even the middle class people. It was a kind of, alternative movement which often remains confined to a particular group of enlightened people. In that sense, it doesn't get the support of a substantial amount of people behind them. These are not happening with these kind of movements. So these movements are different from the old ones. It's not that bad in that sense. It may be bad for the state, but you see, state has now in a fix. I mean, it cannot just coerce and stop these movements. I can tell you another very brief story. That is like this. Well, if the ministry, if the Coal India Limited, who is a kind of Ministry of Energy and Power, that controls that, you see, state company, is in the mood to have more coal mines in forests, then you have in your same government one environmental ministry, which has classified the entire Indian territory into two. One is go areas, another is no-go areas. So one government wing is standing against another government wing. This is a dilemma. And also, you see, often the court, the judiciary, as well as the media, are taking proactive roles. And those are going in support of the downtrodden. So these are different from the old agrarian movements. I'm not taking any paradigm from, you see, what you read in sociology as from the new social movement. I'm not telling that it doesn't have any target, it is not structured. I'm not telling all those dimensions of new social movement which we may use to classify environmental movement. But these are the movements of downtrodden people and supported by the larger section of the society. So that is the difference from the old, maybe a bit what is called as Naxalite movements. So these are not that bad.
Over breakfast, I think it was maybe it was last night, Dave and I were having discussion about this. Is it an environmental movement? Is it an agrarian movement?
Yeah.
And we came up with a term which maybe might help bridge this a little bit, which is that sometimes we think about environmental movements as about the environment and not about livelihood.
Yeah.
So maybe the way is to think of these all as livelihood movements, or even better, all life movements.
Yeah, life movements. We may have new terms for this, but that may explain this movement. But the problem is that we cannot explain these movements with the existing set of terms. I mean, these are not purely livelihood movements. It involves, you see, their sense of environment also. Now, the problem is that, well, one kind of a feature of Indian environmentalism, which I may share with you, is that, in many sense, which you are also telling the other day, that we live in the environment. We cannot separate environment as out there. It's not external, so that I have to save that. If I remain within this, then saving my life is actually saving the environment. So that is about the Indian type of environmentalism, which I definitely share with Ramachandra Guha and other people. But then again, after all this analysis, if you stamp that environmental, I would again not go with that. These are not that easy, I think so.
So maybe a message here to conclude with is that instead of us being colonial in
Yeah.
our intellectual ideas,
Yeah.
we should also be learning from the Indian experience and learning
Yeah.
that maybe what we thought was an environmental movement was a kind of
Yeah,
lively
yeah,
movement.
yeah. We may
It's just
have
the other
to
way.
look it in from a different standpoint. Yeah, that's great.
Well, thank you so much for bringing that message this
Yeah.
afternoon.
Okay. So thanks a lot. Bye.